All right, team. So today we are doing the rear brakes and rotors on a 2017 Nissan Altima. So as you see there, I'm doing the brake caliper so that way I can do the brakes on the passenger side. It is a 14 millimeter socket that you're going to be using to go ahead and take out the guide pins in. It is already a little loose because I went ahead and started working on it before I actually hit record and then started recording after. But we'll go ahead and get these guide pins out, clean up the rear caliper, make sure that it's all clean, no dust or anything like that is in the way. So what we'll do is take the guide pins out and then put them on a shop towel just so that way they don't get any kind of debris or anything on them. We are going to be cleaning them off anyway, but this way, no little rock particles or anything like that as you're cleaning them off will scratch the guide pans and possibly damage them. So as you see here, I'm having a little bit of a hard time getting the top part of the caliper to go ahead and open up. So ultimately, what I just decided to do is just take out the bottom guide pin and then remove the whole portion of the caliper, which obviously made it a lot easier to go ahead and do. So now we're going to be removing the old brake pads just to be certain. Then we're going to go ahead and actually start cleaning the caliper itself. So I'm going to get some brake clean, spray it onto the caliper, and then using a metal wire brush, just kind of clean off the contact points and everything to make sure that the new brake pads have a clean surface to go ahead and attach to. Definitely while you're doing your brakes, you want to go ahead and make sure you're using that wire brush to get any of the brake dust, any kind of foreign materials that could be on there. So that way it's nice and clean and you did well. So see, just kind of spraying it on here, wiping it down to make sure that it's all nice and clean for everything. So the next part of the process that we're going to be doing from here is actually pushing the piston back. Now, just like on a front caliper, we'll go ahead and use the compression tool to go ahead and do that. But since it's so much smaller, what I do is the center portion of the compression tool, I will go ahead and get it inside of the piston chamber right there. It'll distribute the pressure evenly towards it because it'll be right there in the center. It won't, you know, force one side in versus the other. It'll just all push it back. Normally on the front caliper, you'll use like say an old brake pad, kind of put it on there to make it sure it's even and flush, and then kind of do it from there. But since it's so small on the rear and confined, it's hard to get a brake pad in there. So I found that this is much easier to go ahead and do, and there's no way that you'll end up pushing the piston back unevenly. Now, as you can see, I'm taking the tool out. I've gone ahead and pushed back the piston as far back as it can go, so that way we can get the new pads in there with no problem. One thing I did forget to mention is to make sure that you chalk the front wheels off so that way they don't roll backwards. Obviously, can't really use the e-brake because we're going to be changing the pads, but you want to make sure that you're on a level surface and the front wheels are chalked so that way you can definitely make sure it's not. So, and here I'm just showing you what the other brake pad on the driver's side look like and why we'd be replacing that one. Okay, so here we are with the new pads. Just kind of rubbing them down a little bit just to make sure that there's nothing on them or anything like that. So here we're going to go ahead and clean off the contact points with some brake clean. Use a shop towel or microfiber towel, anything that you have on you that'll work. Kind of get those all cleaned up, and then we'll go ahead and get the brake pads on there so that way we can make sure that they're insecurely and cleanly. So as you see, you can go ahead putting the brake pads on. Now you want to make sure that that little metal clip is on the outside. I've seen it too many times now where people will go ahead and by accident put the pads in the wrong way and then you're gotten metal scraping onto that rotor. So obviously you don't want to make sure that that's not the case. So now we're going to be going ahead and cleaning off the guide pins. Just give them a good wipe down and then obviously you want to go ahead and make sure you're greasing them back up before you put them back in. So as you're applying the caliper grease, just make sure you're just running it along the tire shaft. Now I did go a little heavy on the guide pins only because the housing where the calipers go into was pretty dry. So I wanted to make sure that there was going to be some lubrication in the chamber there so that way it'll make sure everything still runs smoothly. So now that the bottom one is partially in, we're going to go ahead and clean off the top one. Make sure we get that all cleaned off, get all the old grease off of it, and then just go ahead and just lubricate the shaft again. And then we're going to go ahead and place it in. Again, it's a little heavy on the grease only because, again, they were pretty dry when I went to pull them out. So it's just lining everything back up, sliding it in, and then just tightening everything up. And now using the 14 millimeter, we're going to go ahead and tighten everything up. And then once everything is all tightened, we're going to go ahead and actually torque this back. Which is 35 foot-pounds. Like I said, this job is just as similar as the front, except the caliper is smaller than what it is. So here I am snugging everything up, making sure everything is good, making sure these rubber boots here are actually in the proper position. That way no dust or any foreign contaminant ends up going in there as well. Now, this is a photo of what it looks like when you let your brakes go down to metal. It ends up damaging the rotor terribly. So definitely want to replace that. So here we are on the driver's side. We're going to be going ahead and taking these out and then replacing it. So first we got to do is remove the entire caliper. So we're taking that 14 millimeter, undoing the guide pins, so that way we can go ahead and get that top portion of the caliper out. And then after that, we'll go ahead and actually get the mounting bracket off. So again, for the guide pins, it's 14 millimeter. For the mounting of the caliber bolts, those are 18s that we're going to be removing from there. So so you just take that top portion off, move it off to the side so that way it won't be in the way. Then remove the brake pads. And then after removing the brake pads, we'll go ahead and get those 18 millimeter bolts on the back side of the mounting part of the caliper. So there's two bolts, one on the top, one on the bottom. So here I am taking off the top bolt. Said it's an 18 millimeter that you're going to be using to get that off. There's one. And now we're going to go ahead and take off the second lower bolt down at the bottom. Same process. And that's number two. So now the entire thing will come off, just as easy as that. Now we have basically full access to the rotor, so we can get that off. But first, the new rotor, we're going to go ahead and get some brake clean on it and then wipe it down. There is a substance that they put on it from the factory so that way they don't rust or anything as they're being waited to be shipped out. So you just go ahead and spray some brake clean on it, get a shop towel or a microfiber towel, wipe it down, spray, wipe it down. Make sure you get both sides because the coating is on the entire rotor. Now, the main reason you want to go ahead and do this is if you do it without doing this step, you're getting that material on the brake pads, which could cause them to not work properly. So, but now yeah, we get the old one off. And here's a little closer look of what it looks like. Metal on metal, just destroying it. So here's the new one. I'm gonna go ahead and get that on there. Now the big difference with this one, there's a also a four-wheel drive version of this vehicle that the rear rotors are actually a little smaller. So you got to make sure you get the right materials. So now, as you see, I'm putting on some lug nuts to kind of hold it in place as I reattach the mounting part of the caliper. So that way the rotor doesn't move around or anything like that. So first, obviously, you want to make sure you get it all lined up. So easiest thing to do is go ahead and get that top bolt, begin to thread it on so that way you can hold it in place while you go ahead and do the bottom bolt. That way your both hands will be free. But as you can tell, I was having kind of an issue there with getting the top bolts in, so I opted to go for the bottom bolt. You can do either one as long as it one bolt is kind of holding it in place so that way you can make sure that you're not cross threading any of the bolts. Now with that 18 millimeter socket, we'll go ahead and snug up these bolts to make sure they're good. And then once we get them all snugged up and everything, we're going to go ahead and torque them down to 98 foot-pounds. Yeah, sorry about that, team. I didn't realize how close my arm was to the camera. Ended up making it go out of focus. All right, so basically everything at this point is reverse order. We're going to go ahead and put the guide pins back in. Make sure those are snugged in for the top portion of the caliper. And then once everything is all snugged up and good, we'll go ahead and torque everything down. So like I said earlier, the top portion for the guide bolts, or the slide pins, I should say, are 35 foot-pounds, while the actual mounting bracket itself is 98 foot-pounds. So now we're putting the new brake pads on, which I've already greased on the contact points. Sometimes these things are a little bit of a pain to get in, but just take your time with it and you have no issues. There the back end is in. Now the front end is in. So now it's just closing the clamshell. Get it right back into place, and then now get that second guide pin into position. Now, obviously, after everything is all torqued to spec and everything, you want to go back into the vehicle, pump your brakes a few times just to make sure that the pistons get right up onto the brake pads and snugged in properly. Now, the next step should be to go ahead and actually torque everything to spec. So, again, the slide pins are 35 foot-pounds, while the mounting bracket for the caliper is 98 foot-pounds. Very important to go ahead and do this. If it's not to the proper spec, the bolts can go ahead and loosen up and then be gone from there. And you'll have the caliper coming off or being loose and then not functioning properly. So now take the lug nuts off as we start getting ready to get the tire back on. All right, so after torquing the mounting brackets, I'm going to go ahead and get the tire back on, and then once we get the tire on, we'll go ahead and torque that as well. Now, the torque spec for the lug nuts on this vehicle is 83 foot-pounds. Obviously, when you're torquing them down, you want to go in a star pattern. Right now, just putting the lug nuts on by hand, snugging them up, you really don't have to do it into a star pattern, but once you're going to torque them down, you definitely got to make sure you're torquing them to spec. Otherwise, those lug nuts will uh, back up and come off, and then you can have an incident where the tire comes off. So for right now, I'm just using the joystick to kind of get it in space while the vehicle's still in the air, just to kind of help snug up the lug nuts, which as you can see, I'm doing it in a star pattern. Just doing it this way so that way when the time comes for me to lower the vehicle, I don't want these studs being bent or anything like that. So now the vehicle's on the ground. And again, we're going to go ahead into that star pattern and making sure that the lug nuts are torqued to 83 foot-pounds. And that's it, team. So if this video helped you out at all, please like, share, subscribe. Definitely will make sure that what I'm doing for you guys actually is helping you guys out so that way I can continue making these videos for you. So other than that, team, just take your time and that's pretty much it. So on to the next.